Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend Brad. What is going on tonight, man?
Not much, man. Just in paradise. Planning a backpacking trip this weekend, which I'm excited about. Not nearly as exciting as
Where are you heading?
just a little trail. Like there's a mountain here called Minogus, and they're alongside the saddles.
Solo, or are you going out with someone?
Solo.
Nice. Solo's a big deal. I don't care how far you're going. Is this your first solo trip?
Yes, sir. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing the first time you go solo. So you'll like it. Yeah.
What about you, man?
Things are good. Recovering. My girls, we had the 8th grade graduation this week, which was exciting. I actually have high schoolers now, which is a scary thought, but I think I was telling you before, they got through 445 kids plus speeches in an hour and 3 minutes. I was very impressed. I was very impressed. It was very efficient. I was dreading this thing, and it worked out pretty well. It was nice. But yeah, now my girls are in their summer before high school, and it's Dad feels old all of a sudden.
Well, you kind of are getting a little old.
Yeah, well,
gray beard.
Yeah, well, it is what it is.
So along these lines, we actually have something I'm personally very excited about. I know I'm going to get belittled and mocked continuously over the course of this next hour. But as we talked about on a previous episode, Dan went on a backpacking adventure to the White Mountains in New Hampshire on the Pemi Loop. And he went with a couple of our really, really good friends, Andy, Musser, and Jake Everett. And they both have joined us tonight. And we thought it'd be kind of fun to have a little roundtable discussion about the trip, some of the adventures you guys had, some of the chaos you ran into, just other general musings. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for
having us.
Yeah.
So
good to be back.
Yeah. Some of you may recognize Andy from previous episode. But Jake, since you are the new visitor encroaching upon our hallowed podcast, how about you tell the guys a little bit about yourself?
Oh man, where to start? I think it goes back, 5-6 years now, Dan? We both started in the Iron Council on Team Sierra, and our journey has been pretty much in line with each other since then until Dan decided to leave me, broke up with me. But yeah, it's actually Dan and I's second backpacking adventure we've gone on together. We went on one, I think it was 2019, out in Cove Lake State Park down in Tennessee, and that was another 3-day, 2-night trip that definitely had plenty of stories that came from it.
Yes, it did.
That's almost a whole podcast in itself right there.
That could be a whole podcast. Let's just say that involved two gentlemen named Skeeter and Scooter in a side-by-side rescue. And we'll save that story for another day.
Skeeter, Scooter, and Tech.
Yep.
All right. So I kind of just want you guys to riff. Let's just kick this off,
all right.
I guess.
Well, I guess what we'll do is I'll jump in and I'll just kind of start where we're at, and we'll go from there and kind of fill the guys in. So we've got a group of about 7 guys, Brad, myself, Jake, Andy, and 3 of our other good friends. And we were trying to put together a trip this year to get everyone together. It didn't work out that everyone could make it, but we did end up with a small crew of us heading up to New Hampshire for a backpacking trip. And we decided to do the Pemi Loop up in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. So for those that don't know, the Pemi Loop is a roughly 32-mile loop that goes up in the Pemigewasset wilderness of New Hampshire. It takes place, part of it takes place on the Appalachian Trail, and it hits, I want to say, about 9 of the 48 4,000 foot plus peaks in the White Mountains. So just to fill people in on that a little bit too. If you hike in New Hampshire, everyone knows about the 4,000 footers, but there are 48 distinct peaks in New Hampshire that rise over 4,000 feet. Most of them are above tree line in New Hampshire. I know that for those of you who are listening in the Rocky Mountain area are going, we don't even start at 4,000 feet, but you got to remember these mountains start at, I think, what did we start at, Andy? Something like 8,000 or 800 feet base elevation when we started the climb, right? So it's a pretty good climb, and it's all big granite boulders type stuff. So we had a plan to go up. We were going to leave on a Friday morning and hike through and finish on a Sunday afternoon. So we rolled out. We all got up there Thursday afternoon. We were supposed to be met by a fourth guy, AJ, who unfortunately threw out his back that day and couldn't make the trip. So it just ended up being the three of us. And we rolled out Friday morning and the chaos ensued. I don't know. I guess we'll just get into the story, right? It's the trip. It's a loop. So you go in and it looks like a lollipop. You go in about 4 or 5, about at least 2.5 miles to the first point. You can either go left and go up on a ridge line called Franconia Ridge, which is a very iconic ridge line in the Whites. It's part of the Appalachian Trail. It's photographed a lot. You can see almost all of the major New Hampshire peaks from up there. And then you can hike around. So that'd be clockwise and end on what's called the Bonds. There's 3 mountains called West Bond, Mount Bond, and Bond Cliff, and then come down and hike out. Or you can go counterclockwise and go up the Bonds and come out Franconia Ridgeway. So we decided based on the weather that we were going to go counterclockwise because we were staring down some weather Friday and Saturday, and we wanted the good weather on Sunday for Franconia Ridge. So the hike in, I guess, was the beginning of the situation. The hike in on the Bond side is the first 4.5 miles is basically a flat logging road. It is the most boring hike that you will do in New Hampshire. And it's also like very little elevation gain, if any. So it's just a death march of sorts. It's boring. There's not much to see.
It's also got sword.
Yes.
It was like kind of like a weird muggy 60 degrees, like not hot, but a little muggy. Yeah, it wasn't long before, maybe half a mile in before it was.
Yeah, well, it follows that river, right? So
we were kind of expecting it,
Yeah.
We're outdoors. We're near water. There's gonna be, but
so
we were pretty pumped up.
We were pumped up. We were getting dive bombed. These two stop and load up on DEET. I just decided to keep walking because I couldn't even handle stopping.
Dan had about 50 mosquitoes hanging all over us. He had a long sleeve on, but I guess they weren't sharp enough to stab through the.
Somehow they didn't get to me.
Get to the sweet spot.
Well, it couldn't have started any better, though. We had a nice breakfast at the local pancake place. Yeah. Sun was out when we started. Humidity wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
No rain.
Perfect day.
And then we got to talk about the sign and the ranger that greeted us right about us.
That's right. I forgot about that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Jake,
go ahead.
Take that one, Jake.
Oh, yeah. So we start out, and first of all, Andy loses some buckles to his pack that we had to do a quick remedy of Dan disassembling one of his day packs to fix the chest straps on Andy's 50-pound hunting backpack. And then as we're about to head over the bridge, head out and start on the trail, the park ranger comes out there, and there's a little sign that's right by the trailhead, and it says, and the park ranger looks at us, he's like, "Oh, you going to the top?" And we mentioned some comment, "Oh yeah, we're doing the Pemi or whatever." He said, "Well, you better have your rain gear and your winter gear ready to go." And a little sign there says, "At the summit, wintry mix." And we're like, "Oh boy," about 36 degrees.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it's 65 and like perfect hiking weather as we're heading up. Barely a cloud in the sky.
Yeah. We were looking at local forecasts saying like highs in the 70s, lows in the 80s. So that's much was in my pack. Like there's no top of the mountain other than now knowing that, well, we probably should have taken a peek at.
Yeah. But we continued on, right? You get through those first 4.5 miles, and then we turn up towards the mountain, and the trail eventually starts to head up. And once it heads up, it heads up pretty quick. We got through 3 or 4 stream crossings as you kind of meander through and follow the stream up the mountain. And then we hit a staircase. And I think that's when we kind of realized what we were in for the climb. Because that mountain, I mean, we gained 4,000 feet so it was 11 miles total for the day. It was 2 miles. So, I mean, like we gained 4,000 feet in about 4.5, 5 miles, I think. So that's, it's a pretty good clip.
Yeah.
And I remember we got up this one staircase and the trail kind of goes up and around to the left and then kind of comes back into this little valley. And we finally get to a little bit of a clearing, and we look up and there's this whole mountain in front of us. And you can see a peak and you can see a little like rock area jutting out on top. And I just look over at Andy and he goes, "Holy shit, that's where we're going, aren't we?" And he just had this look of like being beaten already.
It was like I can't. It's something that you can't really compare it to anything. It was literally like straight up. It was almost like looking up at a skyscraper. It was that. Like how is it?
I don't think you really understand the magnitude of the mountains until you get into them.
No,
and are surrounded by them. But yeah, we decide we kind of go through this valley and go around this corner again, and we're working our way up that large area that we saw, and we stopped about halfway up, thinking about lunch, and we're like, we'll wait till we get a view. Well, we never got a view.
Started raining. It
started raining, so we just decided that all right, let's throw in the rain gear, keep trucking, and then we get to the area where it kind of gets up to Bond Cliff, and there's this little like rock scramble that you got to go up, and it's basically this little area of rock climbing. And I told the guys right there, I'm like, this is it. This is kind of like make or break time. Like if we want to stop or take a rest or something, like, and be under tree cover, this is where we got to do it, because otherwise from here on all the way to the top of Mount Bond, it's open ridgeline. And we just decided, screw it. We've only got, at that point, we only had like a couple miles left, and it was only like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, I think, if that.
A couple.
Yeah, a couple miles.
A couple miles of the most ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a little bit of foreshadowing on that is by the time we put our rain gear on, we were pretty drenched in sweat by that climb up there, and then it had also been raining on us for a little bit, and so we were wet underneath the rain gear before the rain gear even went on, which led to some of the problems that were coming up next.
Yeah.
So why don't you pick it up from there, Andy?
Yeah, definitely a major problem. Yeah, I mean, heck, we got up over this rock scramble. This is where the views start. So, we're like, wow, sporadic views of mountains. Beautiful. And the mood, obviously, 3 of us. Yeah, we're having these partials, but it's pretty gnarly climb and a heck of a. So, we're scaling along. We're going across this clear cliff, sheer drop off side, kind of making our. And yeah, the skies were. I mean, it's the weird thing was it wasn't usually when you're on top of a mountain. I don't care. Usually, like the storm had just stalled. It was almost with each it got heavier. It got colder. And I mean, I'm going back, these pictures indoor snowing.
I'm convinced I saw snow or sleet. Yeah.
Either way, it was wet. We were wet, and Gore-Tex might as well t-shirt it. At this point, the excitement is still there. Yeah, we're feeling wet, this and that, but okay. We stop at Bond Cliff, picture. I'm kind of up there. Look, like left is 1,000 right inch valley down, and then right in front of me standing is like another like seemingly huge mountain. And I turned to Jake, and I'm just like, we got to go over that. Oh yeah, that's where we're going. And at that point, I got a little worried because we were wet. We were wet, we were cold. Oh damn, about to get real fast. So,
and I started right down off the Bond Cliff towards Bond, while Andy was busy taking selfies of himself. I'm like, I'm getting off this ridge line.
Yeah, but there was really no like protection once we were there, right? You get off Bond Cliff, you go from pure rock to like scrub brush and stuff, but that was maybe chest high at most in the cull or the divot between the Bond Cliff and Mount Bond.
Yeah.
And then so we proceed over to Mount Bond, and we're moving at very different speeds at that point. Jake and Andy are trucking along, and so we've got our rain gear on, which includes pack covers. So Jake's like neon green, and Andy is this hunter orange pack cover. And I'm just watching these 2 neon blobs disappear into the fog, because I'm a much slower hiker, especially on that uneven surface. We should talk about the trail up there too a little bit. It's not exactly like a trail at that point. It's basically boulder hopping.
Yeah. It's a rock scramble the whole way up.
Yeah, I mean, you got rocks twice the size of your head or bigger, and you're just kind of jumping around from each one to the other. So I'm taking it easy to make sure that I don't blow out a knee or an ankle, and then these guys are just scrambling ahead.
And there's definitely a couple rocks you get to, and you look at it and like, all right, time to pause and make a plan for getting over this one.
Not only that, it's the factor now that we've all got the, we've all at this point. I know my boots are sloshing. It was one thing for your body to be wet. As we stopped and kind of talked briefly, we before we said, dang, I'm starting to feel like we got to move. So that was like my go up that song, because I wasn't. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we're navigating through little evergreen puddles on whatever trail it was, and then we're met with 2-3 foot boulders, seemingly just climbing up. And what it's like with weight in your. I mean, you're shifting. You're taking big knee steps, your weight's throwing you all over the place. You're about falling in crevices, it's the real deal. And on top of that, the mental game that's in your head about, oh shit, I got to get behind the shelter. And yeah, it got real.
Yeah, I think we all hit at different points, because I don't ever remember really vocalizing it, but I think we all hit that point in that part of the hike where it was like, all right, this is where it's starting to get dangerous. Like, this is where it's starting to be real. Like, we can't get stuck out in this. We have to make it to a point where we can, find shelter.
Yeah.
Because it was getting cold for sure.
I say, like, the spidey senses.
Yeah.
Like, and I think actually that was part of, that's, I think, a big reason my knee heading up, that signal in me, that instinctual, oh shit, was happening. I got a burst of adrenaline. I was flying up that mountain, a bit of pain. But, as I climbed, it got a little worse. At that point, wrenchel. At that point, it was so wet. We were so wet, and from this climb, and it didn't really matter. I got up to top of Bond Mountain, look back, Jake pops up. At this point, our mood 180 degrees.
Yeah.
Whole other side of the. I'm looking at Jake, and his face is totally different. I remember, one of the 50 selfies, looking at my face and myself. I'm like, damn, there's definitely a mood shift here. And, me and Jake had a moment up there. We couldn't find where the hell the trail went. Went left, right, and here it just straight up just switchback, really, really sharp behind us. Thankfully, Jake found it. We kind of had a moment on that mountain. Dan was behind us, and we're just, as we're sitting there like half shivering, we've either got to go now, or we wait for Dan. And we didn't know. That was a sketchy climb. If Dan had already told us earlier, look, guys, I don't want you waiting for me. I take my time. We're like, all right, it's the move. We got to go, because we can't. We're just going to pray that Dan's going to show.
When Andy said that he flew up that mountain, he is a mountain goat. He did fly right up that mountain. And I lost sight of him going up Bond. And it gets you because you're bouldering the way up, and just it's switchbacks and the shrub bushes and a little bit of a tree line, just enough to cover the top of your head so you can't see around the next turn, but get to the top of that switchback and you turn, and there's a whole nother 100 yards of bouldering right up, and then you get to the top of that and it switches again. And I'll tell you, you have some conversations with yourself along that trek up there, and luckily found Andy at the top of Bond, and yeah, we walked in circles around the peak of the mountain there, and there's a little marker to mark the peak of the mountain, but we didn't even pay any attention to that. We were just wondering where the heck the trail was to get off it.
Yeah, at that point, we were half in shock. We couldn't even make sense out of where the hell to go. And on the other end of it, me and Jake were never up there, but we literally had no communication. We had no map. We're on, thankfully, the path there. And that, it was just like, oh, yeah, well, the shelter's just on the other side of the mountain. Just on the other side. That's right.
Yeah, we go down, and it's about half mile down, and it's the trail's like a gutter. It's the gutter of the mountain, so water's all washing everything away. So it doesn't matter because we're soaked all the way through anyhow, but we're just marching through puddles and on the way down. And Andy's definitely slowing down a bit. You could tell the knee was really starting to trouble him on that descent there, and we finally get to a little marker that says the shelter. The guy out, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is I think 0.2 miles away down the hill there, and we're like, all right, it's right around the corner. So we start trucking down to Guy Out, and that is the longest 0.2 miles of my life, and it was never ending. And it was actually worse on the descent than going up the mountain, because when you're going up the side of the mountain, you're keeping warm because you're constantly exerting yourself. But going down the side of the mountain, you're not exerting as much. You're not providing that body heat anymore, and that's when that chill and that cold really starts to set in.
Yeah, so I had kind of a similar experience as you guys. So we basically split up after Bond Cliff, and I finally get up to Bond, and I've been up there before, so I kind of knew where I was in the trail, and I'm coming around the corner. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be near the top soon. I'll meet up with Andy and Jake, and I come out in the clearing, and there's nobody there. Shit, it's such just like a mental drain when you're expecting to see people and they're not there. But I kind of looked around, got my bearings. I knew where the trail was down to the shelter, but again, I hadn't been up there for probably about 5 years. I knew that I had to hike down. There's a spur trail off to the left to West Bond, and then the shelter was beyond it. I thought that hike was like 5 minutes to the spur trail, and then maybe another minute or two past that. I was dead wrong. I mean, that trail just went on forever. And when all you want to do is get dry and get warm, like that, it just took forever. And like these guys said, it was literally the rain gutter from off the top of the mountain, and it was just, the whole trail was puddles. There were spots where it obviously puddles up enough where they had put in like little footbridges and stuff, and the footbridges were underwater, and you're just hopping from rock to rock trying to like just not step in, calf deep water. But eventually get down to the spur trail, and I'm like, all right, the shelter's got to be right there. Well, no, it's another 5 or 10 minutes down to where the shelter cutoff is. But I get there, and I'm happy. I'm like, all right, I've made it at least. But you're right, Jake. As soon as we stopped climbing is when it got really cold, because you're not generating heat anymore when you're descending. So all you're doing is just getting more and more wet and more cold. And by the time I hit that shelter trail, I was freezing. And I take the turn, and I did the same thing. I'm like, 2.2 miles, no problem. I got about halfway down, and I remember thinking in my head, I might have even said it out loud because I was just kind of like in that state. I'm like, where the fuck is this shelter? Like, it just didn't exist. And
and also, like, at this point, we're thinking we have to set up tents and our hammock systems, and like in the middle of this, like, oh, great, let's do this.
Yeah. Well, so we still got to set up our shelters, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the front there, and then Andy's following me, and we're going down the longest 0.2 miles. And I'm like, I hope we didn't miss it, and that it's not some little spur trail off the side. That's not going to be good. Then finally, suddenly out of nowhere comes this money box where it says $15 a night. So we cram, I think, $40 in there, because it's the only 220s Andy had on him. And suddenly there's a canvas tent on the left, and this girl calls out of the tent. I guess she's the keeper. I don't know what the term is up there.
Yep.
But she's like, "Oh, you guys looking to stay in the covered shelter?" And we're like, "Absolutely." And she's like, "Oh, well, I'll meet you there." And we're like, "Oh, this is freaking perfect. The covered shelter." She's like, "Yeah, there's like nobody there too." We're like, "Splendid." So finally we head up, and we find this wooden shelter, and we're like, first thoughts are, let's get out of this soaking clothing.
Yeah, that was seeing that. I just remember though that climb up. I mean, those steps are legit in with, but after that whole climbing up that freaking steps, man, I was practically dragging myself like
into the shelter. You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not. They were pretty steep. Yeah.
Grandpa's dog.
I remember coming down though, and I did the same thing. I saw the money box, and then she yelled out to me, and she goes, "You setting up you going to be in the shelter? You setting up a tent?" I'm like, "I got a hammock," and she goes, "Oh no." I'm like, "All right, I'll take the shelter then, as long as it's dry."
Yeah, so we finally get up to that shelter, and we're like, "Gosh, I hope we don't have to go back and look for Dan."
Yeah,
that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, because we had no clue. We were thinking like, "Dang, all right, we got to give this some time off."
Yeah.
Pretty much by the time we stripped down and surprised some ladies coming back.
There was no we in that. There's only one of us here surprising some ladies.
Yeah.
And that certainly wasn't me.
It was an emergency situation. I had to take off my pants, all right, and my underwear. And this stranger comes out of nowhere when I'm just standing there commando. And thankfully she saw the backside.
And I got to say, to my own credit, I saw that unfolding, and it was about to happen, and I just stayed silent and let it happen.
And just sat there like a creep.
I just sat on the porch and watched, waited for it to go down.
But man, I've never been so happy.
But sure enough, 5 minutes later, Dan comes trucking right around the corner, and I mean, you thought like we couldn't even see him from where we were heading up on. He was totally out of sight.
It wasn't long at all, actually.
No, it's like the little engine that could. It didn't stop puttering.
Thank God.
I just kept moving. That was the only thing that was going through my mind that whole trip from Bond Cliff over Bond and down. Like, you just can't stop. Like, you don't have to go fast. You just can't stop. Like there's just no way you survive this if you stop. I mean, it sounds probably a little hyperbolic, but it was, conditions were bad, man. Like, by the time I got to the shelter, I really couldn't feel my hands, and I definitely was shaking a little bit, just because of being cold and wet. So I did the same thing as you guys. I just stripped out of everything, got on whatever clean dry clothes I had. And again, we did not plan to be in conditions that were probably that cold.
No.
Like I had some stuff that was going to keep me warm, but it wasn't. I would have packed differently if I had known it was going to be in the 30s and I was going to be that wet.
Absolutely.
But yeah, got to the shelter, got all set up, and then at that point, it was just trying to figure out how to survive the night.
Yeah, we weren't the only ones that showed up at the shelter. So it started out, there was just the three of us, and then we saw the two bedrolls there. I think the ladies that Andy might have mooned. But by the time early evening, late afternoon showed up, there's I think 12 of us all crammed in this little shelter, and it's wooden pallet, and then there's a mid-level loft, so you can fit about 6 people on top and 6 people on the bottom, and there isn't much room for anything else. And everyone's just got all their clothing and all their wet gear hung up, trying to dry as much as they could. And we, Dan and I, are trying to figure out, all right, how are we going to make it through the night? Because we're both set up and ready for hammock camping, and we did our research beforehand and looking at the forums and some videos, and plenty of people hammock camped the whole Pemi Loop, so we thought it would be fine. And in fact, we passed a couple campsites coming down to the shelter that would have been set up fine to string some hammocks up, but in those weather conditions, that just wasn't happening. And we had the gear for the hammock camping, and we would have been plenty warm if we were in the hammock with the underquilt and the rain fly and all that stuff, but neither of us had any sort of protection between the wooden ground and whatever we tried to manage for sleeping arrangements. So we laid out our underquilts and luckily had some blankets in there, and Andy was all wrapped up in his super warm Zen bivy contraption like a mummy.
Yes. So Andy's all set for tent camping. Andy was going to tent camp. We were going to hammock camp. So all we've got is our quilts for our hammock. No inflatable pad or anything like that to sleep on. So we're just sleeping on bare floor. This guy has this Zen bivy setup, which is like the sleeping pad with like the sleeping bag that kind of like forms to the pad, and he's all just curled up in there with a thing over his head, all warm and cozy. He's complaining the next morning that he was too warm. Meanwhile, Jake and I are trying to just get through the night and not freeze our ass off. It was an interesting night in the shelter too. There was a bevy of different sounds going on in that place.
And the majority of them coming from Mr. Dan himself.
Yeah, well.
But yeah, that was probably one of the longer nights of my life there.
It was definitely.
Yeah.
Sleep was not coming.
There was a point in the middle of the night where I actually thought long and hard about just packing my shit and starting to walk out. But we should back up a little bit, because before we went to bed that night, Andy mentioned before that he tweaked his knee on the way up. So our plan was to do the whole trip, right? It was to go from where we were at the Guyot shelter to Mount Garfield, which is about 11 miles away the next day, camp there, and then hike out over the Franconia Ridge and out back to the trucks. But, Andy tweaks his knee. We're looking at the weather the next day, and it's not looking much better, right? We're looking at potential downpours in the morning. It does look like the weather's going to clear out by late afternoon into that evening, but you can never be too sure up in the mountains. And that was on the limited reception that we were getting up there. One of the guys seemed to have better reception than the rest of everyone else. I don't know how he was getting it, but anyways. But at one point, we're making dinner, and I don't know, Andy went to get water or something, and Jake and I are looking at each other and going, I don't think it's a good idea to keep going with him if his knee's all squirrely. And we're trying to figure out the best plan here, and we kind of came to the conclusion that it would be in nobody's best interest to continue the trip the way that we've got it planned, that we should probably hike out the next day. But we also kind of needed Andy to come to that conclusion on his own.
And luckily, he came up the steps 2 minutes later with a filled water bottle, and he said, "Guys, I don't think we can keep going."
Yeah. It was like he was listening to our conversation. It was kind of interesting, but
that was I mean, we basically said at that point, let's just see how it is. More than likely, if this thing does, with the weather combined with thunderstorms and all our clothes drenched.
That's right. I forgot about that too.
On platforms, plus the 4 guys that were in the shelter, they were moved next shelter area. So it was like, damn, we've got to keep. In other words, we beat all these people to this shelter, thankful, And the next day, we knew we basically, we were in for more weather. We had wet clothes, and heck, we had to half beat these guys to the next shelter to get a decent spot because we might have been shit out of luck. And
for me,
it was just one of them like, boy, you got to just swallow your pride and be a little the younger me. But
it was one of those. It was one of those situations where you had to really kind of swallow your pride a little bit and make the right decision. Make the safe decision, because there's unlike a lot of different trips I've been on, there's no bailout point there. I mean, there are we were talking about it. We were even looking at a map at one point. There are trails at different points that go down, but it's not like they're easier trails than what we came up. They're all hard to get up into those ridges.
Yeah, we kind of knew,
and we had
you knew what we climbed up.
Right, and we had no vehicle access if we went down one of those trails. There was a ton of logistic problems at that point. So
at the end of the day, it's safer to go with a known than the unknown unknowns that we're going into when we think about what controllable factors are, because we don't know the weather tomorrow. We don't know the condition of Andy's knee, how that's going to be looking like, and we don't know if we do get in trouble or something goes wrong, what's the best way to get out of there. But we do know the way that we came over Bond Cliff and the way we came over Bond, and we know that's probably doable if that's something that we had to do.
Yeah. I mean, the hardest part of that trip was going to be getting back to Bond Cliff, right, and getting back up over those two peaks, and then from that point out, it was a relatively easy downhill. Not the easiest thing when you get a bum knee, but the hiking itself was not that hard. So we get through the night. It's not a comfortable night. I think I was using my tarp for a freaking pillow at one point. I also think I was sleeping sitting up against the back wall because I couldn't get comfortable.
Yeah, I went out and I sat on the porch for a good hour or so just because I couldn't sleep and I just couldn't stand to be sitting in there cold anymore.
Yeah.
And I brought this little Hillinox chair, which is super light, and I mean, man, I'm like, I thought about dragging this back in and throwing a blanket over and sleeping in the chair for the rest of the night.
I think I made myself get up and go take a leak at least 3 or 4 times just to warm up. Just walking out to take a leak would warm me up.
Yeah,
damn, that's your age.
I mean,
yeah, that too.
Beyond that, it was a chorus of snores, people constantly and shuffling. I obviously crawled in my like 7, right? And next thing I know, I'm waking up at 11. It better be 11 p.m. Oh shit! And from that point on, it was maybe 15 or 20 minutes. So it was pretty brutal. I mean, at least I was warm. I had that one thing. I can't complain.
So the next morning we get up, we have breakfast, and we pack everything up. And I don't know, one of you ran off to use the privy. And then as we've got our backpacks on, I think it was Andy. He comes back. As we got our backpacks on, it's pouring. And Andy was trying to actually convince us to stay another night because the weather was not looking good that morning. And Jake and I were not having that. There was no way in hell we were sleeping another night in that shelter. But Andy comes back and we're just looking at him. We're like, this is not safe. If you've got a bad knee, like we can't be hiking in this. Let's wait it out. So we decided to wait. The plan was we'll wait it out. We had kind of like a cutoff time of like 2:00. We figured if we leave it by 2, we'll get out at least to the flat road before it gets dark. And then if we have to night hike a little bit, with our headlamps on that, it won't be the end of the world. But so we take our packs off, we go back up. We had put on all our wet clothes to hike in. We figured with the idea being they're already wet and they're just going to get wet again. We might as well keep the dry clothes dry so we have something at the end. And we get back into dry clothes, waited out, and we're talking to a bunch of the other guys there, and we find out that we've got a window coming up at like 9:30 where the sun's gonna, or not the sun's gonna come up, but the rain's gonna stop and we're gonna get decent hiking weather. So
essentially, is the moment we changed out and started making coffee, the sun came out.
Yeah, that's true, right? That was the kick in the balls right there. Was as soon as I put on my wet clothes, hung them back up, and put my dry clothes on, I actually saw like a little bit of blue sky off the porch of the shelter, and the birds, those stupid birds that you were feeding, Andy.
The gray jays.
The gray jays, they come back, which means it's not raining anymore.
Right.
So I think we had basically second coffee with everyone there, and then packed our shit up and headed out. And we got pretty lucky, right? We headed up to the top of Bond. So the hike I was actually dreading the hike out of the campsite because it was just downhill the whole way from the main trail, but it was actually a pretty easy hike up. And then we had to hike all the way back up to Mount Bond, which was a pretty good climb, but it kind of got you going too. And it was cloudy and the wind was rolling through a little bit, but it wasn't raining. And then fortunately we got pretty good weather for the hardest part of the hike down Mount Bond.
Yeah, once we hit that ridge line again. Then it started opening up.
Right. We got through all the boulder fields, and then once we hit the ridge line, like the cull in the middle, where it kind of went from boulder field to just crappy rock, it started opening up again. Yeah. And then we hiked in rain for the next hour or so.
Yeah, we were moving along. Me and Jake ahead at right with the call. Next thing you know, Jake slips just like a step down. The way he went back and thing, and he says, "Oh!" And for a little bit, I'm not saying nothing. I'm just like, "You got to be." And at this point, going down for me was a little difficult. Adapting, moving with my knee, going up and going straight was fine, but he pops back up after a little bit. And he's like, "I'm fine." At this point, again, the rain is starting. Right, I'm gone again. Looking back, Jake's getting like shit. Be a little more serious.
I mean, on that note, let me point out that when Andy was climbing to the top of Bond Cliff, hey, we both came to the conclusion there that we'll do what we did the day before. Dan's going to catch up, and that we'll meet him when we get to the tree line on the other side of the rain. And we'll find a good place to stop and let him catch up, and we can have a snack and eat some lunch and check in and be good to go from there. But not that Andy doesn't just go up the side of the mountain. He doesn't follow a trail. He goes straight up the side of the mountain. And there I am, meandering along the trail as he's just hoofing it up like a mountain goat right up the side of Bond Cliff. And man, I'll tell you, when I went down, and it was slick coming down. It was honestly a little harder coming down than Mount Bond to the ridgeline than it was going up, just because it's that same bouldering experience, but now you're going down and everything is soaked and slick.
It's so much easier to step up than it is to step down. Yeah.
And those very rocks there, you're like, all right, I got to come up with a plan to get up them. You're like, all right, I got to come up with a plan to literally sit down on the rock and scoot down to the next one. And it's just one of those steps. Just my left ankle just went down the wrong way. I heard a crack and went sideways. I went down and like, oh fuck, I think, oops, shouldn't have said that. But I thought it was broken. So I'm like, all right, I got to stand up as quickly as I can, see if it's good to go. And luckily, I was able to put weight on it and figured it was probably at that point, nothing's broken. It's a pretty bad strain, but as long as I keep the foot going forward and backwards instead of lateral, then that'd be all right. So we meandered over Bond Cliff, no stopping for pictures this time, and headed back into the ridgeline.
So when you guys were going over Bond Cliff, like you mentioned, we got separated again because I'm slow, and I hit that cull and I saw the weather actually like move in. It actually I could see Bond Cliff, and then I looked down and I looked back up, and all of a sudden I couldn't see it again. And as I was climbing up it, I was in the cloud, and it was the first time in my life that I've been backpacking or hiking and actually really understood why people build cairns. I was actually hiking from cairn to cairn. Like, were you guys in the soup like that, or were you guys? Did you guys get up and over before that rolled in?
That rolled in just as we were hiking through it. We weren't able to watch it come up in front of us and go into it, but it definitely hit us while we were up there. And those cairns, I'll tell you that it makes it look like there's a lot of false peaks. You keep thinking you're getting to the summit of Bond Cliff there, but nope, you see one more cairn ahead, and the climb keeps on going.
Yeah. There was probably about 3 or 4 false summits for my climb back over. But yeah, we got back into the woods, and then it was pretty fast paced out. You guys were hustling. I was surprised at how far ahead you guys were by the time I caught up to you. And I think I only caught up to you because you were jibber jabbering with those guys.
Well, yeah, our plan was to stop a bit down, and once we got to the tree line to wait, and it's amazing how many people we passed, and they're like dry. And at this point, like, you can see literally like a ray of sunlight far down, and like, it's beautiful. And here people were so
the happy trail runners.
Yeah, very happy. And I mean, we're just sitting there shooting the shit, and next thing you know, here comes Dan rolling through, slow and steady. Yep. And I should say smart. Here's me and Jake. Yeah, Billy getting up the side of mountains or down, and we're the injured one.
So this is where the comedy is, though, is because I'm always the injured one. And for me to walk out of this, relatively unscathed, and you two being the banged up ones, was a little bit of comedy in my book. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we just keep rolling down. I don't know about you guys. Again, we got a little separated there towards the end. I ended up slowing up a little bit. The last mile before we hit the logging road section was some of the worst hiking I think I've ever done in my life. I don't know if it was because I was mentally done, or I knew that we still had 4.5 miles of flat road to hike, or what, but I just wanted off that trail so bad. And I don't know. Did you guys experience that too?
Oh yeah, it was flat. It was muddy, mosquitoes, and no scenery, and it seemed like it was endless.
Yeah.
Right. At that point too, I think that's when Jake's ankle really started. And at that point, like before we hit the death march, like the death march, like I was doing fine. And it was once we hit the flat, that's when completely. I mean, heck, we maybe got through the death march, where it just turned from dirt to almost like a gravel, to like old railroad bed, and my wet feet just started. And me and Dan were just trucking along, and before I knew it, I'm like, sucks.
Me and Andy are trucking along for about 3 miles. We were just shooting the shit. Somehow Jake slowed up behind us at that point. We're just shooting the shit because we knew, like, all right, we've made it through the hard stuff. Like the sun is out at this point. We're dry. We've got our rain gear off. Everything, life is pretty good. We're heading out towards the truck. And with about a mile and a half left, I could literally hear it in Andy's voice. Like, I don't know if the blister on your foot popped or what happened, but something happened, and you just went from happy-go-lucky Andy to just the miserable bastard who was just every turn we went around, you're like, is the bridge there? Is the bridge there? Like,
I was hallucinating at that point.
Oh yeah.
It's like, you have a tree like horizontal in the woods, kind of up in the tree line. There's a bridge, Dan, we're here. And oh man.
No, sorry, bud.
My feet just got like the wet feet and that ground, that even ground, something with it.
Yep. My favorite part of that though is looking at all the hikers going in and just like giving them the death glare.
That's what I mentioned on the way out too. It's just funny, like when we were going in, we were the happy, clean, fresh shaven looking hikers heading in, and everybody miserable coming out.
No, sir. Yeah, but we got to that bridge that crosses over the river right before the trailhead, and we waited for Jake, and we all crossed it together, finished strong.
Yeah.
So it was a good trip, man. It was I don't know, I'll speak for myself. It was one of those trips that I will remember forever because of how hard it was. And I can remember being in it and going, this is that type 2 kind of fun story where it's not a lot of fun right now, but I'm still actually enjoying myself because I'm just pushing myself. But I'm going to really enjoy this later on. And I know that later on the stories are this will be a story we tell for a long time because there were so many things that went, I won't even say wrong, but just didn't work in our favor.
Yeah.
It's not like we had major gear failure or major injury. Your injury was bad enough that made us abort the trip, but it wasn't like, we didn't have to get you rescued or anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, I gained a whole appreciation, obviously. White Mountain, had any been past them, spent any time in them, boy, they had burrowed a special place in my heart, that's for sure. I mean, I'm with you, man. Like memories, tell you what, I'm ready to finish that.
Yeah, me too.
Not happy.
I want it back now.
I mean, I love it, but I need the redemption.
So what lessons did we learn from the trip? I guess that's probably a good place to go now.
Well, first of all, rain gear is going to fail you at a certain point. And then we talked. We forgot to point out earlier, but Dan and I convinced Andy not to pack the rain pants the night before.
Yeah. Oh, that's just extra weight, Andy. You don't need that.
Yeah. But, my heavier weight probably better gourd I had. But I think that on top of that, though, Jake, but I think like talking with some local, looking at some stuff they're very conscious, and they more or less take a more calculation of these mountains because your moisture out of nowhere. You don't want to be soaked to the bone in rain gear because what's it going to do at that? You might as well. So right. I think that was a big take for me. Like maybe actually have my merino, no poly, but also, for me, like, once the instinct pop and run, go, fight or flight, I've got to be able to harness that, tap into some patience, because that's all shit, man. How do I control myself? Like, the intentions were there. Yes, we had to get the shelter. We had to do it quickly. Jeez, long step away from the whole trip, man.
I think another thing is we were faced with a lot of decision-making points throughout the trip in terms of the weather conditions and moving on without Dan and seeking shelter, deciding to turn back, go out the next day. And I think that as a group, as a team, we came to some good decisions and made the right calls, even though it's tough to abort a trip, turn around after one day. But I think we made the right decisions when faced with those circumstances, and as tough as they may be, and it worked out well for us in the end because of that.
That's a really important point, and it's something that I noticed too. Was we didn't rely on one person to be kind of like the decision maker either, right? We all kind of let each other lead at certain points with their strong points. I mean, yeah, I had been up there before. I kind of knew the terrain a little bit, so maybe I was navigating a little bit more than you guys. But we all had equal input, and we all respected each other's input, and we're also cognizant of the safety factor that was involved in it, which I think in something like this is important, because you can easily get yourself into trouble. Like, let's just say, for instance, we had decided to continue on because we were hard-headed or whatever, and Andy completely blows out his knee, or Jake's, I mean, your ankle hadn't blown up at that point, but you roll an ankle or whatever happens. It wouldn't have been a prudent idea because Andy's already injured, right? He's already hurt. Like, why are we going to risk getting into a situation where now all of a sudden we've got to figure out how to get a rescue team up there to lug him out and go from there. So it's that to me was a key part. But yeah, I mean, gear wise, I think we made actually pretty good decisions, all things considered. I think for me, my my mid layer game needs to be a little bit better, but I think that's small tweaks. Our we all said the same thing. Our rain gear, regardless of what it was, just was not going to hold up to that. I mean, that was basically like being underwater at certain points. Your rain gear is not going to help you if you go swimming.
And I think, yeah, we talked about this too. Like, how could we prepare ourselves better physically for? I don't think it's very physically challenging as it. And how do you mimic that true mountain strength? Long Island, Virginia, Pennsylvania. I mean, you cannot mimic the White Mountains unless you're up there, you're living and doing that stuff. How do you mimic that? I mean, I'd still been rucking for 10 months.
Yeah.
No problems. Boy, just those. I don't think there's anything out there you could really do. The only thing I could think of is my mobility.
I mean, the only thing that you've got probably over Jake and I is that you've got that that section of AT that runs near you that's pretty rocky, and that would at least get you working on uneven terrain. Like, I know down in Long Island, like, I'm just not going to get that.
Yeah.
So I've got to figure out how to create that some other way, whether that's working on a Stairmaster just to keep the up and down, and some kind of odd mobility work or something like that. But that's a key point right there. Is physically, I felt like I was in very good shape for this trip. Like, I never felt like I was winded. I never felt like I was out of shape to carry the pack or anything. But my body was just like, these are just motions that I'm not used to. So all those support muscles and all that balance portion of it was, like you said, if you're not up there, you can't mimic that at all. So yeah, I've actually been trying to do a little bit of research on workout routines that would help that. And short of putting a lot of lunges back into my workout, which I really don't want to do, I can't really find anything that's gonna that would help it. You just got to work on some stability stuff, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, lunges with some weight, some body weight,
yeah.
Tighten up.
The thing that I've been curious about, though, with the workouts for this kind of thing is everybody works on the up stuff. To me, the bigger challenge was always going down. It was, you're on a rock and you've got to lower yourself down, 1.5 feet, 2 foot onto another rock and still maintain balance. So I do think that there's something to be said for working with like a plyo box or something with a weighted vest or something, and working the step down as well as the step up.
I was just going to say, I was plyo, one head hanging, it's mobility, that absolutely, yeah.
Because even on dry conditions, I mean, that's brutal on the joints and the knees going down, whereas going up isn't so much difficult on the joints as it is, as you said, weighted lunges. But going down, I mean, that's really where the trekking poles made a huge difference for me, is finding those points of balance to get down safely.
Yeah, the trekking poles were key for me. I mean, you guys have better balance than me. We could just see it, like all three of us walking around in the woods over those rocks and stuff. But without that extra stability, I would have fallen a ton. So yeah, and I think the other part of it is nutrition. I think part of what kind of screwed us on the hike up was we were so excited to be where we were, and we didn't want to stop in the rain necessarily and get anything to eat. And I think we were under nutritioned for the hike over the bonds. We probably had enough water in us. I mean, granted, you could just stop and open your mouth and get water, but I think that we need to probably do a better job of stopping every couple hours and getting at least a little snack into us or something on the way up. Yeah. We were just so pumped to be out there and doing it that we didn't really do that.
Well, it also got wind.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we flew. We did. I mean,
yeah, we went fast.
There was no need to shelter.
No.
So
we would have been bored.
That's definitely, weather is weather. It's all about adapting.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, it was fun. I mean, the value in getting out and doing tough stuff with good guys, that was the best part of the trip for me. I mean, obviously, it was physically challenging, mentally challenging. You got to put yourself to the test, but the fact that I did it with two guys that I respect and who are brothers to me, that was the best part of the trip. Was the bonding factor for me. So I hope you guys have similar feelings, but it's for the guys who are listening, I can just say that if you want to build your bonds with guys, find hard things to do. You don't necessarily have to go out and get into a wintry mix in the top of an above tree line ridge with a couple of guys, but you can go out and have a good hike, have a good workout, whatever it is, do something physically challenging, and you will build bonds that way. We'll be tied at the hip forever because of this adventure, regardless of what we do in the future. We've been going for about an hour, so you guys got anything else you want to add?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly right there. I mean, that's really what it's all about, is getting out there and doing hard stuff with good guys. And I mean, that's where the adventure is. That's where the memory is, and that's where the bond grows.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the next trip and the next adventure, whether it's us tackling the whites and finishing that Pemi Loop again, or whether we're on to another mountain range or another adventure. I'm looking forward to it with you guys.
Yep.
Hopefully Brad can be there too.
Yeah, hopefully Brad can be there.
Yeah, Brad.
Jake, I was going to say maybe next time though we don't have a medical situation in one of our trips. I mean, this was significantly more minor than the last one, but maybe next one we'll try and figure out a way to make it go off a little easier. I want to thank you guys. It was a fun trip. I can't wait to do it again. And I'm with you, Andy. I want redemption.
Let's do it.
There's definitely a redemption tour in our future. So I want to thank you guys for joining us. Obviously, this was a great conversation. I hope the guys listening found some value in it and just enjoyed listening to us, shoot the shit campfire style tonight. We ask that if you guys are listening, you check us out at untamingmasculinity.com. You can find show notes for this and all of our other episodes, as well as links to our social media. We'll post some pictures of the trip up there as well. Make sure you're giving us rating and reviews on your podcast players. That helps spread the word. So Apple or Spotify, especially, go check us out. Leave a rating and review. That really helps us get the word out to other people. We've got some great episodes coming up, so make sure you come back next week for more great content. And until then, we will leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?